you may be able to convince them that your pricing is reasonable, but at the end of the day, if they're still not satisfied with it, they may do that contract, but they're going to shop you for the next one. Internally, you may be able to convince an employee that this is how it's going to be, but if they're still not satisfied, they may, behind your back, start looking for another job.
Well, welcome back to another episode of Good Business. Guys, today we've got a special guest, John Lowry, Dr. John Lowry, the author of Negotiation Made Simple. I am so honored to have him here. He flew in from Nashville this morning just to come see us, and so I'm excited for you to get to know him as well. So John, thank you so much for being here today.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. It's fun to be in Austin, Texas, and being on the Good Business podcast. There was actually a Texan that taught me a lesson about business one time, and it applies to this. He taught me a really important lesson. He sat me down one time and he said, John, you can't do good business with bad people. And so the first thing that you've got to look at in terms of doing business with people is make sure they're good people, because that leads to good business.
Brilliant. Well, sounds like a good guy. I like him. So John, would you mind giving just a brief background of who you are and how you got to this point where you decided to write this book?
Sure, I'd be glad to. I'm actually a lawyer by background, and some people tell me that's not the place to start in terms of your intro, is to tell everyone you're a lawyer, but I'm a lawyer. And it was really the practice of law that led me to negotiation and seeing the importance of negotiation as a professional skill, and also recognizing how critical negotiation is to my success and to everyone's success out there. And so I'm grateful to have had that experience practicing law, and it really launched me into this whole new realm of thinking about how do I equip people with better negotiation skills, because not only will it help them in moments of conflict, which is the context of the law that I worked in, but it'll also help them in terms of business, in terms of who they are as people and what they want to accomplish in life. And so I have spent the last 20 years helping people think about how to solve problems and how to do better in business using the skill of negotiation. And as a result of that, now I lead a management consulting company called Thrivance, and then I do a lot of settlement counsel work as well, working with lawyers and different sorts of entities trying to help resolve major lawsuits.
Wow. Okay. So you've got quite the background to really pour into this book. When did you say, hey, I need to write this?
So it's kind of an interesting story about writing the book. There's actually a really important lesson that comes out of it. I think it's actually more important than maybe any of the lessons in the book. But I had been training people and developed this course that I do all across the country, different sales teams, executive teams, legal teams, risk management, all that kind of stuff. And I really got this course down. It's interactive. It's a lot of fun. We do exercises. We play games. And after doing it just every other week for 20 years, you kind of got it. And so in one of my courses, a gentleman by the name of Donald Miller, he attended the course, and he came up to me afterwards and he said, you have an amazing course. Like, this content is incredible. You've got to write a book. And so here I am talking to a New York Times bestselling author about writing a book. Like, that's a huge opportunity, right? And so that's probably where the original idea started, was that conversation with Don. But then as it progressed, I had spent about 5 years thinking about this, starting, stopping, and I was frustrated. And so I'd sit down with Don and I'd say, you know, it's really hard. Negotiation's different. Like, you got to teach people in this interactive way, and you can't do that in a book. And so I was trying to do that. And finally, I remember the moment where Don was like, John, like, it's a book. Like, it's not a class. Like, just write it down in the book and let people read it. And I was like, yeah, but they won't get it. And so anyways, we worked through this journey for like 5 years, and he was patient with me. And we finally got to the publisher, and the publisher said, John, look, they said, you know, people are going to read this book while they're sitting on an airplane, or they're going to have their AirPods in and they're going to listen to this book while they're running on the treadmill. Like, they don't have time to do all these exercises and this interactive stuff. And so what I discovered in that process was I actually had to unlearn how to teach negotiation in order to relearn how to teach it in the context of this book. And as soon as I unlearned and started with a blank canvas saying, I have 2 hours of somebody's time, what do I need to tell them in 2 hours that will make them an effective negotiator, that will help them accomplish what they want to accomplish in life? And when I got to that place in my own process, that was the moment where the book flowed really easily, and it was done a year later.
Wow. Okay, lots of lessons learned. I'm sure you're incredibly grateful to Don, and so am I,
Sure.
because here we are as a result of all that. So would you mind just diving in? Let's talk about what's in the book. What is it that you learned through that process of unlearning how to teach? And what would you say the core principles are tied to Negotiation Made Simple?
Sure. Well, the book is really broken down into 4 parts. The first part is all about managing the most important thing that you have to manage in a negotiation. And before you get to managing the other side, before you get to managing the process, before you get to managing the substance of the negotiation, the first thing someone has to learn how to manage is themselves. And so the whole book starts with some thoughts about how to manage yourself more effectively. Because the reality is negotiation, even though I may represent a hospital system and someone else may represent another business, or you're a salesperson and you represent a product, whatever the case might be, negotiation's always people negotiating with other people. Yeah. And so the human element, you can't extract it from the process. It is there. And we can spend some more time talking about some of the nuances of that. But the reality is that within ourselves, our own human element comes to play. And so we have fears and we have egos and we have things like that impact our decision-making process. And if we don't know how to manage those effectively within the context of negotiation, our intuition and what causes us to be comfortable can actually lead us astray to where we can end up with bad outcomes because we were trying to be comfortable through the process as opposed to doing what was most strategic. And so that's really the first part of the book. And then I go into the competitive side of negotiation as well as the cooperative. There's 2 sections, one on competitive, one on cooperative. And then the book ends with providing people with some insights on how to effectively prepare for a negotiation, because that's the number one way you can do better, is to be more prepared walking into the room or sitting down at the table.
No, that's incredible. So tell me, what's just kind of a glimpse of one of those core principles of how to prepare yourself for a negotiation?
Yeah, so as you think about preparation, one of the things that I like to do is to help people understand that when you're at the table, you have a lot of emotions, you have a lot of things running through your mind, and it's important just to step back and to be able to take a larger perspective of what you're trying to accomplish, and then asking yourself the question of, is what you're pursuing, is how you're communicating, is the way that you're managing the process, is that setting you up to get where you want to go? And so what I do is, in the book, I give what I call the negotiation preparation tool, which is literally on one page of paper. You can take the entire framework that I've given you. It has you work through about 20 boxes. Half of those you fill out from your perspective, half of them you fill out from the other side's perspective. And in doing that, you actually map the negotiation. And it's not going to go exactly as you map. It's like a good business plan, to where business plans, the businesses never grow in perfect accordance with the plan. But because you've done the plan, you've thought about the important strategic decisions and questions that you've got to get right. And because you've thought about those, the business is much more likely to be successful. It's the same in negotiation. If you think about those things up front, that negotiation is much more likely to be successful by working through that process.
I love it. I love it. So when it comes to just the day-to-day life, I mean, I think somewhere in your book you mentioned that I mean we're in a constant state of negotiation. Every human interaction is a negotiation. What would you say is kind of the end result of going through this process of committing to building that strategy before you go into that? What's the end result typically that you find as a result of that, especially when it surrounds things like complex issues? In business, and obviously in your realm, in the law realm, legal realm?
Sure. Well, I define negotiation as a strategic communication process to get a deal or to solve a problem. And as we think about life, it's really all about getting deals and solving problems.
Yeah.
If we think about relationships, it's one deal after another in terms of where are we going for dinner tonight? And then the next night, we got to make the same decision again with our partner or whoever. And then there's problems that come. And some of those we can anticipate. Some of those are totally out of left field, but we got to deal with them nevertheless, especially if we're in a leadership position. And so where I start this book actually with a story about a carpenter, a traveling carpenter. And it's a story, I don't even know really where it originated. I heard a preacher talk about it years and years ago and heard him tell this story. And so I included it in the book because I think it's an illustration of kind of where this is going. And this story really is about two farmers that get in a dispute over a stray calf. And they were friends forever. They helped each other out. They were great neighbors. They get in this dispute. They don't talk anymore. They don't like each other. They make life difficult for each other. And so here comes this carpenter who's looking for work. And he goes up to one of the farmers and says, "Is there anything I can do for you?" And the farmer says, "Yeah, I'll go buy a bunch of lumber. I need you to build a fence because I want to separate our farms." And so as the carpenter is doing this, he's hearing the farmer talk about the friendship that used to be, and now they don't like each other, and he wants to create the ultimate separation through this fence. And so the carpenter goes to work, and at the end of the day, this farmer comes back, and the carpenter hasn't built a fence at all. And he's kind of frustrated. And so he looks, and he's like, "Well, what have you done?" And he looks over, and the carpenter built a bridge between the two properties. And so this one farmer is angry because this carpenter hasn't done what he's asked. But right in that moment, the other farmer comes down. And the other farmer was like, "I've been waiting this moment forever to where finally we can reconcile and be friends again." And in that moment, the farmer realized what the carpenter did. Instead of building a wall to separate, he actually built a bridge to bring people together. And I think that is the end game that we're all looking for, is how do we use negotiation to bring people together, whether it's to do business, whether it's to make peace, whether it's to reconcile, whatever the case might be. That's what it's about.
I love it. Obviously, that's a great example of what not to do, meaning for that original farmer, just not doing anything to try to negotiate and to get through that issue. What would you say are some other common pitfalls that specifically business leaders make in the negotiation space? I mean, personally, I'm dealing with an issue with, we're building a house right now.
Sure.
And we're dealing with some issues with our builder, which I think is just par for the course. And
Yes.
I'm really grateful for your book because it's kind of helped me let me just say, avoid making emotional decisions.
Yeah.
So I know for a fact that I avoided some heartache there. But what would you say are some issues that you see quite commonly that you're hoping to help overcome?
Yeah, so a couple of things for business leaders in particular. One is to understand that in negotiation, there's two aspects. There's the substance and there's the process. And so many times the business leaders, they probably substantively know what needs to happen. And in many cases, they have the power to make that happen because they're the leader. And yet, what I think so many of them learn the hard way, perhaps, is that by not paying enough attention to the process, the substance actually doesn't manifest itself. Or even if they kind of by force make it happen, you still have people that are very dissatisfied. And so you've just created another problem that you've got to solve. And so it's really important for business leaders to answer the right question. The substance question is, what is the right answer? But just knowing what the right answer is doesn't get you to the end of the day or doesn't get you to success. What gets you to the end of the day or success is the second question around process, which is, how do I get others to the right answer? And that becomes the really important question for business leaders to master, is understanding how to get others to the right answer in a way that it will actually become the right answer, but also in a way in which relationships are intact, people are empowered, all those things that are really important in terms of a team that is trying to do business together. The other thing that I think is really important for business leaders to understand about this process is that many times negotiations start with two people or two parties taking positions. And so one party, a position is just a perspective on how an issue or a problem should be resolved. And so many times those positions differ. And as a result of that, there's a clash, there's conflict. And so you need a process like negotiation to reconcile that. And what I see so many business leaders do is they will try to persuade. And they will spend a lot of time, they will go gather information, they will go build leverage to try to persuade the other side that they're right and the other side is wrong. And so if you do it in an external context with a client, you may be able to convince them that your pricing is reasonable, but at the end of the day, if they're still not satisfied with it, they may do that contract, but they're going to shop you for the next one. Internally, you may be able to convince an employee that this is how it's going to be, but if they're still not satisfied, they may, behind your back, start looking for another job, or they may do the quiet quitting thing. I mean, there's lots of different ways that you still lose them, even if you kind of get them on board through persuasion. And so one of the things that I tell business leaders is, and it's in the book actually, is to transition from positions. Don't get sucked into this, what I call positional bargaining. Instead, what I encourage people to do as they transition from positions, to begin to think about what is driving people to take the positions that they do. And this is where we get into that element of ego and fear and values and relationships and goals and motives. These are the things that it's harder for people to talk about. So it's not as easy for those just to come onto the table or become part of the conversation, because someone may have a hard time saying, look, this is what I'm scared of, or look, I'm not going to agree to this because I won't look good at the end of the day. I mean, it's hard for them to voice that, but that's what's going on. That's what's driving them. And so leaders need to take the conversation in a different direction to be able to uncover those things and connect with those things, and then use those things to get really creative in terms of how to solve problems, how to put deals together. And if they do, those will become what I call durable agreements. They will become agreements that not only resolve the issue, but also advance some of the relationships.
Wow. Yeah, as you were talking, I was just like, oh, okay, I could have handled that differently. But I think what I'm picking up on though is there's two key requirements, probably more than that, but I'm picking up on two. You need to have two willing parties to communicate. That's incredibly important for a successful negotiation, right?
Sure.
And you've got to have some level of emotional intelligence. Could you speak to both of those issues and maybe how to overcome them if one side is struggling with either of those?
Sure. So if we transition from positions, there's a moment where we go from talking and persuading to where what we're trying to do is we're trying to listen and understand. And so the communication changes dramatically when, instead of me trying to assert my will by talking and talking and talking, by sitting back and just asking questions and listening, that becomes the process to where now all of a sudden you have the opportunity to be empathetic. And in the book, I have a whole chapter on empathy. I don't know of any other book out there where negotiation and empathy has come together. I think it's a really new conversation about the role of empathy in business. And I tried to kind of set the stage for it in terms of saying, here's the role of empathy in negotiation and why it's so powerful. And what empathy allows someone to do is to not only understand, but to go even further in terms of being able to take on the perspective of the other side. And by doing that, now they can think more productively, as I call it, to where instead of thinking about what I want and having that be the entire thought process of defining what you want and thinking about how to get it, in terms of taking the time to really understand what the other side wants, and then thinking about how to match that and blend that with what you want, now all of a sudden it's a different conversation, it's a different dynamic, and really good things can come from that. And so I encourage people to really take this idea of empathy and to slow things down. And to sit and to ask questions and to understand. And then usually what happens is out of that process, you will learn something that completely changes your strategy. And out of that process, you'll be like, that's the path. And it will reveal itself and make solving these problems or putting these deals together actually much easier.
I love it. So when we're thinking about just application of this in the workplace. I mean, you've mentioned employment, how to interact with your employees. You've talked about sales folks negotiating new deals. What would you say is just some areas that you can encourage people to begin working on themselves right here, right now, to be better in the workplace? So maybe if it's to a business leader, someone who's leading an organization, what are some just areas that you would encourage them to begin improving themselves? You've mentioned empathy, so putting others first, thinking about others more than you think about yourself. You've mentioned, and we've talked about communication. Is there anything else that you would encourage them to really set some time aside and start working on themselves with?
So as I think about business leaders in particular, or organizational leaders, you might say, especially in the context of what they have to do every single day, I think one of the most important things, and I see it in negotiators, really good negotiators, is they don't get rattled. Things happen that are surprises. Some of those good, some of those bad. And what I find is that very mature negotiators and very mature leaders, they're able to do kind of what I was talking about before, to where instead of getting sucked into the moment where everyone else is, they're able to it's almost like the Matrix where he kind of rises above the scene, right? That's what they're able to do. And by doing that, they're able to think strategically. And in thinking strategically, they're able to make better decisions. They're able to limit themselves from doing things that can become destructive in those moments. And they're able to continue thinking. And so the example that I give in the book, I think it's one of the best examples, is the Miracle in the Hudson and Captain Solly. And this is at the end of the book, and I just think it's such a powerful illustration. And I never knew the story until I had an opportunity to sit with Captain Solly in a small group of leaders and literally watch the NTSB flight video with him and have him talk about what was going on in his mind. And so in that experience, we were just asking him questions informally as this was playing out. And so, we asked him, we said, you seemed really, really calm throughout this whole process. Like, did you ever realize you might die too? And he said, that's kind of where the training came in, is he said, when you have an in-flight emergency, you've trained for it, you've prepared for it. And so that training and everything kicks in. That's important for people to understand that the training, though, it wasn't just on the substance. The training was the process for how to deal with such a moment. And so for Captain Solly, he said, I wasn't trained on how to land an airplane on a river. He's like, there's no flight simulator in the world that teaches you how to land an airplane on the river. But he says, I was trained on how to communicate with the first officer. And we didn't know each other. We met the night before, and I think that was our first flight together. But they knew how to communicate, even though they were like 20 seconds into their first flight together. As soon as that happened, boom, they knew exactly what to do. He also had incredible vision. And so one of the things that was amazing was, we asked him, we said, how did you make the call to not go back to LaGuardia, but to put this thing in the Hudson? He said, that's where my experience came in. Is he said, I knew I'd be second guessed. I knew that they'd run the models, but I didn't have the models. I didn't get a chance to do the math. So I just had to make the call. And he's like, I just looked out and I was like, we just don't have enough altitude or airspeed to get back. Like, we're just not going to make it. And he was ultimately proven right. And so he made the call based on his experience that he had to put that plane in the Hudson, and that was their best chance of survival that day. But then he had incredible vision, because he looked down the Hudson and he saw the USS Intrepid, which is a big aircraft carrier that's now a museum that sits in Manhattan. And he knew there was a ferry terminal right next to that aircraft carrier. And so he said, if I put this plane down as close as I can to that ferry terminal, it's going to limit the amount of time these people are in the water. And he said, that's going to help save lives. And so incredible vision. But then what he did, even beyond that, was once he landed that plane, and this is where luck came in, because there was a certain angle that he had to land that plane, and he literally had like a 1 degree margin. And he's like, we just got lucky that we hit the 1 degree margin. He says, but as soon as I landed that plane, he said, my role changed. And here's a moment where, as leaders and as negotiators, our role sometimes needs to change. Sometimes we've got to be the enforcer, but sometimes we got to be the pastor. And so we got to have the ability for our role to change. And so for Captain Solly, he said, I gave the order as the captain to evacuate the aircraft, but he said, that task is the responsibility of the crew. And so when I walked out of that cockpit, he said, I didn't walk out giving orders. I walked out taking instruction from my flight crew as to how I can support them in accomplishing and making them successful with what they needed to do to get those people out of the plane. He said, the other thing I realized was that once I put that plane in the water, I was no longer the captain of an aircraft. I was the captain of a sinking ship. And he said, the captain of the sinking ship is always the last to leave. And so he said, I made the decision I was going to be the last one out of that plane that day, regardless of what that meant. And he was the last one to leave that day. And so in that moment, his values kicked in, and his values drove him throughout that experience as well. And so, yes, there was a level of miraculousness that was part of the miracle on the Hudson. But there was also a level of being prepared and being ready for a moment like that led to that great outcome. And I think there's a lot that leaders can learn from Captain Solly just in that moment that can equip them for the challenges of leadership.
Wow. Well, I remember hearing about that story with Sully and just being in awe that they all survived. Like that was just truly a miracle. But with that in mind, a great way for people to begin that training process is to pick up your book, right?
Absolutely.
That's a great way for that to happen. And to watch your course on Business Made Simple University. How else can they begin training, getting that equipment?
Sure. Well, I think reading the book is a great start. There is an online course at BMSU that people can check out. They can also go to lowrygroup.net, where you can get information about how to bring us in for live courses. Lots of people, they'll bring us in to work with their sales teams, to work with executive teams, and to equip them with negotiation skills that can make a huge difference in terms of the success and the trajectory of the company. And then I would encourage people to just be intentional about taking what you learn and going and applying it. So the beautiful thing about negotiation is you get to do it every day. And you get to do it with all sorts of people. And so taking the skills and saying, okay, I'm going to walk in, I'm going to do this a little differently. We're going to see what happens. And if it's a train wreck, guess what? You got tomorrow and you can go back to what you were doing. But you may learn that you actually generate better outcomes, or you actually make more progress or have more success. And if that's the case, then now you've got a new tool that hopefully is going to catapult you in terms of your career and what you want to do. And so that's the biggest piece, is there's lots of resources out there, but the people that change are the people that go and are courageous enough to put it to work.
I love it. And I'm excited to be one of those guys. So thank you so much for being on the show today. Before we wrap up, John, is there anything else that you feel like you want to impart or just leave as a reminder? I mean, I feel like everything you've said is plenty of that, but I'm just wondering if there's anything else that you wanted to kind of remind people of before we wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, I think as we wrap up, understand that negotiation is a skill that we use in business, but it's really a skill we use in life. And so I tell people at the beginning of every one of our training, I was like, look, I know I'm here to make you a better salesperson, and I know I'm here to make you a better leader, but me being here actually is far more than that, because the skills that I'm about to give you, they're also going to make you a better father or mother. They're going to make you a better son or daughter. They're going to make you a better Little League coach or volunteer at your church, or what all the different roles you have in life. Like, these skills are going to help you in those roles. And so I think the last thing that I would leave people with is to say, as you think about getting better, my hope is that you'll use these skills to become better professionally, but they also can have a positive impact on you as a person and you personally in terms of the relationships that really make a difference in your life.
Brilliant. John, thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a huge blessing, and I'm encouraged. And like I said before we got started, I do this podcast selfishly to meet amazing people like you and learn amazing things like what we talked about today. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing and the message that you're sharing with folks, and honored to be here today.
Awesome. Well, guys, that's a wrap for this episode of Good Business with Dr. John Lowry. I'm going to get that right. Guys, I'd love it if you would just go check out his book. You can get it at Amazon, pretty much everywhere online, right? Yep. Check out the book, Negotiation Made Simple by Dr. John Lowry. A good friend and mentor, Donald Miller, he wrote the foreword to that book too. So he'll have a little blurb in there for you. In the meantime, please hit the subscribe button. Like this video if you can. Share it with friends and family. Anyone you think would be impacted by John's story today and everything he's got going on at Negotiation Made Simple and Thrivance. And guys, don't forget to give us a review on Apple Podcasts. And we'll see y'all next week on Good Business.